Lecture 14. The theme is Periodization of English History. The plan of the lecture is Periodization in the Language History. The full extent of the Old English vocabulary is not known to present-day scholars. There is no doubt that many words have not been recorded in the extant texts at all. The evidence of the records has been supplemented from other sources, from the study of the words of closely related Old Germanic languages and from more extensive Middle English texts. Modern estimates of the total vocabulary of Old English range from about 30,000 words to almost 100,000, the latter figure being probably too high and unrealistic. Among other causes, the differences in the estimates depend on the treatment of polysemy and homonymy. But even the lowest estimates show that Old English had already developed about as many words as used by a present-day cultured English speaker. Despite the gaps in the accessible data, philological studies in the last centuries have given us a fairly complete outline of the Old English vocabulary as regards its etymology, word structure, word building, and stylistic differentiation. Examination of the origin of words is of great interest in establishing the interrelations between languages and linguistic groups. Word etymology throws light on the history of the speaking community and on its contacts with other peoples. The Old English vocabulary was almost purely Germanic, except for a small number of borrowings. It consisted of native words inherited from Proto-Germanic or formed from native roots and affixes. So native Old English words can be subdivided into a number of etymological layers coming from different historical periods. The three main layers in the native Old English words are common Indo-European words, common Germanic words, and specifically Old English words. Words belonging to the common Indo-European layer constitute the oldest part of the Old English vocabulary. They go back to the days of the Indo-European parent language before its extension over the wide territories of Europe and Asia, and before the appearance of the Germanic group. They were inherited by Proto-Germanic and passed into the Germanic languages of various subgroups, including English. Among these words we find names of the natural phenomena, plants and animals, agricultural terms, names of parts of the human body, terms of kinship, and etc. Verbs belonging to this layer denote the basic activities of man. Adjectives indicate the most essential qualities. This layer includes personal and demonstrative pronouns and the most numerals. In addition to roots, this portion of the Old English and Germanic heritage includes word building and the form building elements. The common Germanic layer includes words which are shared by most Germanic languages, but do not occur outside the group. Being specifically Germanic, these words constitute an important distinctive mark of the Germanic languages at the lexical level. This layer is certainly smaller than the layer of common Indo-European words. The ratio between specifically Germanic and common Indo-European words in the Germanic languages was estimated by 19th century scholars as 1 to 2. Since then it has been discovered that many more Germanic words have parallels outside the group and should be regarded as common Indo-European. Common Germanic words originated in the common period of Germanic history, that is, in Proto-Germanic when the Teutonic tribes lived close together. Semantically, these words are connected with nature, with the sea and everyday life. Old English examples of this layer are given together with parallels from other Old Germanic languages. Some of the words did not occur in all the Old Germanic languages. Their areal distribution reflects the contacts between the Germanic tribes at the beginning of their migrations. So, West and the North Germanic languages had many words in common due to their rapprochements after the East Teutons, the Goths, left the coast of the Baltic Sea. The languages of the West Germanic subgroup had a number of words which must have appeared after the loss of contacts with the East and the North Teutons but before the West Germanic tribes started on their migrations. The third etymological layer of native words can be defined as specifically Old English, that is, words which do not occur in other Germanic or non-Germanic languages. These words are few. If we include here only the words whose roots have not been found outside English. So, Old English, Clipian or Call, Old English, Brit, New English, Bird, and several others. However, they are far more numerous if we include in this layer Old English compounds and the derived words formed from Germanic roots in England. For instance, Old English Wifman or women in New English woman consists of two roots, which occurred as separate words in other Old Germanic languages, but formed a compound only in Old English. Also, borrowed words constitute only a small portion of the Old English vocabulary. All in all, about 600 words. They are of great interest for linguistic and historical study. The borrowings reflect the contacts of English with other tongues resulting from diverse political, economic, social and cultural events in the early periods of British history. So Old English borrowings come from two sources, the Celtic and the Latin. There are very few Celtic loan words in the Old English vocabulary, for there must have been little intermixture between the Germanic settlers and the Celtic in Britain. Though in some parts of the island the Celts' population was not exterminated during the West Germanic invasion, linguistic evidence of Celtic influence is major. Obviously, there was little that the newcomers could learn from the subjugated Celts. Abundant borrowing from Celtic is to be found only in place names. The Old English kingdoms Kent, Deira, and Bernicia derived their names from the names of Celtic tribes. The name of York and the Downs and perhaps London have been traced to Celtic sources. Various Celtic designations of river and water were understood by the Germanic invaders as proper names. Many place names with Celtic elements are hybrids. The Celtic component combined with a Latin or a Germanic component make a compound place names. For example, Celtic plus Latin. Manchester, Winchester, Gloucester, Worcester, Devonport, Lancaster. And the Celtic plus Germanic. Yorkshire, Cornwall, Salisbury, Lichfield, Devonshire, and Canterbury. Outside of place names, Celtic borrowings in Old English were very few, no more than a dozen. Examples of common nouns are Old English bin and in New English bin, crib. So cradle, New English cradle, bread, clock, dun, New English dun, dark or colored. And dune, hill, cross, New English cross, probably through Celtic from the crux. And a few words must have entered Old English from Celtic due to the activities of Irish missionaries in spreading Christianity. For example, Old English anchor or hermit, dry, magnesian, and Cursian, New English curse. In later ages, some of the Celtic borrowings have died out or have survived only in dialects. For example, Lough dial, lake, Coombe dialect, valley. The role of the Latin language in medieval Britain is clearly manifest. It was determined by such historical events as the Roman occupation of Britain, the influence of the Roman civilization, and the introduction of Christianity. It is no wonder that the Latin language exerted considerable influence on different aspects of English. The Old English alphabet, the growth of writing and literature. The impact of Latin on the Old English vocabulary enables us to see the spheres of Roman influence on the life in Britain. Latin words entered the English language at different stages of Old English history. Chronologically, they can be divided into several layers. The earliest layer comprises words which West Germanic tribes brought from the continent when they came to settle in Britain. Contact with the Roman civilization began a long time before the Anglo-Saxon invasion. The adoption of Latin words continued in Britain after the invasion, since Britain had been under Roman occupation for almost 400 years. Though the Romans left Britain before the settlement of the West Teutons, Latin words could be transmitted to them by the Romanized Celts. Early Old English borrowings from Latin indicate the new things and the concepts which the Teutons had learnt from the Romans. As seen from the examples below, they pertain to war, trade, agriculture, building, and home life. Words connected with trade indicate general concepts. Units of measurements and articles of trade are known to the Teutons before they came into contact with Rome. Evidently, the words were soon assimilated by the language as they yielded many derivatives. Units of measurement and the containers were adopted with their Latin names. So, Old English pond, New English pound, Old English ins, New English inch, from Latin pondo and unicia, Old English minute, minutian, that is coin to coin, Old English flasse and the CS, New English flask, chest. So the following words denote articles of trade and agricultural products introduced by the Romans. Old English win from Latin vinum. Old English butere from Latin buturum. And the Old English plume from Latin prunus, and so on. And the Roman contribution to building can be perceived in words like Old English celic, tigela, copper, that is New English chalk, tile, copper. A group of words relating to domestic life is exemplified by Old English settle, disc, copper, pile, and the New English kettle, dish, cup, pillow. And borrowings pertaining to military affairs are Old English mil, that is in New English mile, from Latin milia, passum, which meant 1,000 steps made to measure the distance. So, in the period of Latin influence on the Old English vocabulary began with the introduction of Christianity in the late 6th century and lasted to the end of Old English. Numerous Latin words which found their way into the English language during these 500 years clearly fall into two main groups. So they are the first, words pertaining to religion, and the second is words connected with learning. The rest are miscellaneous words denoting various objects and concepts which the English learned from Latin books and from closer acquaintance with Roman culture. The total number of Latin loan words in Old English exceed 500. This third layer accounting for over 400 words. The new religion introduced a large number of new conceptions which required new names. Most of them were adopted from Latin. Some of the words go back to Greek prototypes. So, for example, Old English, apostle, antephen, bishop, candle, cleric, clergyman. And in New English, apostle, anthem, bishop, candle, clock. So, and from Latin, apostolus, antiphona, episcopus, candela, clericus. And from Greek, that is apostolos, antiphona, episcopus, clericus. To this list we may add many more modern English words from the same source. They are abbot, alms, altar, angel, ark, creed, disciple, hymn, idol, nun, nun, organ, palm, pine, pope, rule, temple, and the others. So now let's try to answer to the questions. The first, why does the Old English vocabulary contain so few borrowings from the Celtic languages of Britain? The second question, from lists of Latin loan words in Old English speculate on the kind of contacts the English had with Rome at different historical periods. And the third, what facts can be given to prove that Old English was generally resistant to borrowing and preferred to rely upon its own resources?